Your life is not what it seems. The truth about reality. Have you ever felt that there's something profoundly off about the world you live in? Like you're going through the motions, ticking the boxes, doing the things you're supposed to do, but beneath all of it, something doesn't add up. That subtle but persistent sense that there's a veil over reality, and that behind it lies something more powerful, more mysterious, and maybe even more terrifying. That feeling isn't a glitch, it's a signal. And almost every great philosopher, mystic, and scientist who's dared to peer beneath the surface has reached a similar conclusion. Your life is not what it seems. From the moment we're born, we're handed a script. We're told what to believe, how to behave, what success looks like, and what failure means. We're taught that reality is solid, objective, and measurable, that what we see is what we get. But is that really true? Science itself already challenges that idea. Quantum physics has shown us that the act of observing changes the thing being observed. That particles don't even exist in a fixed state until we look at them. That time and space are not as rigid as we once thought. So, if the very fabric of reality is fluid, subjective, and dependent on perception, then what does that say about your life?
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Right now, you probably believe in a version of reality that's been constructed for you. A version that says your worth is determined by your productivity. That success is a linear path. That happiness is a reward you get after enough hard work and sacrifice. But what if that version is just one layer and not even the most important one? What if your life, as you know it, is a projection of deeper psychological and spiritual patterns you've never been taught to question? Let's go deeper. What if your identity, your name, your job, your personality is not who you are, but a mask you've worn for so long you forgot you were wearing it? Carl Jung called it the persona, the social face we present to the world. It helps us function, sure, but it also limits us. Because behind that mask is the self, the true self, the part of you that isn't defined by external roles, but by internal essence. And most people never meet their true self because they're too busy performing the role they were assigned. Now here's where it gets even more unsettling. If your identity is conditioned and your perception shapes your reality, then how much of your life has been dictated not by truth, but by belief? Think about that. How many of your decisions, the people you love, the risks you avoid, the ambitions you chase are based on beliefs you never chose? Beliefs inherited from family, culture, media, trauma. You were born into a world designed to keep you functioning, not awakening. Designed to keep you chasing external goals instead of questioning internal illusions. And here's the big philosophical twist. Reality as we experience it may not be something we live in, but something we co-create. The mystics have said it for centuries: as within, so without. What you believe about yourself, you project onto the world. What you fear becomes the filter through which you interpret events. What you hope for shapes your actions, and your actions shape your reality. So in a very real way, your life is not a fixed script, it's a mirror. And if you don't like what you see, the answer isn't to change the mirror, it's to change the one looking into it. This is where most people get stuck. They feel the dissonance between the life they live and the truth they feel inside, but they don't know what to do with it. So they numb out, distract themselves, double down on the illusion. So, Neston. But what if, instead, you leaned into that dissonance? What if you started questioning everything, not just the big questions like what's the meaning of life, but the small ones too, like why do I respond this way when I'm rejected? Or why do I always feel the need to prove myself? What if the truth about reality isn't out there in the cosmos, but in the moment-to-moment awareness of your own consciousness? Because here's the thing, they won't teach you this in school. They won't show you this in most places. But the most powerful transformation in your life won't come from achieving more. It will come from seeing more, seeing through the illusions, seeing through the layers of conditioning, seeing through your own mind. And when that happens, even slightly, the world begins to look different, more fluid, more symbolic, more alive. You start to notice synchronicities not because the universe is suddenly sending them, but because you've finally tuned in. You start to feel intuition not as a vague feeling, but as a deeper form of knowing, often more accurate than logic. And you start to realize that the boundary between you and reality is not a wall, it's a mirror, maybe even a portal. So now I have to ask you something that might just change your life. What parts of your reality are you accepting as truth that are actually someone else's story? What if your limitations are not real, but inherited? What if the life you think you're living is a dream you forgot you were dreaming? The matrix within, how your mind shapes the world you see. Most people think of reality as something out there, something objective, fixed, measurable. We're trained to believe that the world is made of external things, buildings, cars, people, systems, rules. But what if I told you that reality doesn't start out there? It starts inside your mind. That everything you think you're experiencing is filtered, interpreted, and shaped by your internal world first. What you call reality is not raw perception, it's edited, colored, and often distorted by your beliefs, memories, traumas, and expectations. That, in a sense, we're not living in the world, we're living in our interpretation of the world. And this interpretation is so seamless, so convincing, that we mistake it for truth. Let's take a simple example. Two people walk into the same room. One feels threatened, the other feels inspired. The room hasn't changed. What changed is their perception. Their internal matrix generated a different version of reality. One saw a battlefield. The other saw a playground. And this is not just a poetic metaphor, it's neuroscience. The brain filters millions of bits of information per second and presents us with a curated version of reality based on what it thinks is relevant. That means most of what's happening around you is invisible to you unless your mind believes it's important. You literally can't see what you don't believe is possible. This is why your mindset is not just a self-help buzzword, it's the architecture of your reality. If you believe people can't be trusted, your brain will highlight every betrayal and ignore every act of kindness. If you believe you're not good enough, you'll unconsciously sabotage opportunities that suggest otherwise. If you believe life is suffering, you'll tune out every moment of joy. You are not just perceiving reality, you're constructing it. And the blueprint is your belief system. But here's where it gets wild. Most of these beliefs aren't even yours. They were installed by your family, your culture, your past. You didn't choose them consciously. They were absorbed during your most vulnerable years. You didn't just inherit your DNA, you inherited your worldview. And unless you become aware of that internal programming, You'll keep living inside someone else's idea of what's possible. You'll keep reacting to life instead of creating it. You'll keep thinking you're making free choices, when in reality, you're just running old scripts. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." That one sentence explains nearly every stuck life, every repeated pattern, every unexplainable frustration. That we think life is happening to us, but often it's happening through us through the lens of our unexamined mind. If you've ever wondered why you attract the same kind of relationships, struggle with the same kind of problems, or keep ending up in the same emotional loops, that it's because the matrix of your mind hasn't changed. You've been trying to solve external problems without addressing the internal operating system. So, what's the solution? Awareness. Radical, uncomfortable, liberating awareness. You begin by questioning the most basic assumptions you've made about life. Not just the big ones like what's my purpose, but the subtle ones like, why do I always shrink in front of authority? Or why do compliments make me uncomfortable? Every question becomes a doorway into your personal matrix. And the more you question, the more you see. And the more you see, the more power you reclaim. Because once you realize that reality is not something you enter, but something you generate, everything changes. You stop trying to fix the world and start transforming your perception. You stop reacting and start creating. You stop waiting for signs and start becoming the signal. You understand that the world doesn't need to change, you do. And in that change, the world responds. So here's the next question. What part of your life feels stuck? And what belief is keeping it in place? Could it be that the limitation isn't real but inherited, installed, unquestioned? What would happen if you stopped treating your thoughts as facts and started treating them as filters? Breaking the illusion. How to wake up from the dream of who you think you are. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the person you've been calling me is not actually who you are. And that the voice in your head narrating your life, judging your every move, comparing, complaining, strategizing, that voice isn't the real you. It's a character, a construct, a patchwork of stories, experiences, and roles stitched together over time to create an identity that feels real only because you've believed in it for so long. But what if that identity is just a dream, an illusion? What if the real you has been watching quietly behind the scenes all along, waiting for you to notice? Every day, we wake up and put on the mask of who we think we are. We say, I'm this kind of person, or I'm not the type who does that. But that type is a pattern, not a truth. It's a reaction to past experiences, to parental expectations, to societal programming. If you trace every I am statement far enough, you'll find it leads back to a moment of conditioning, a time when you decided, consciously or not, that being a certain way was safer, that more acceptable or more lovable. And from that point on, you played the role. You became the achiever, the helper, the rebel, the quiet one, the smart one, the funny one. But none of those roles are the essence of who you are. They're just masks you forgot you were wearing. The danger of believing in the mask is that it limits you. It creates invisible boundaries around your potential. You start to say things like, I could never do that, or that's just not me, without realizing that those boundaries were installed, not chosen. You think you're living freely, but you're actually living inside a script. And the worst part, You might spend your whole life defending that script, protecting the very story that keeps you small. But waking up is possible. In fact, it starts the moment you begin to question the story. When you hear that inner voice say, "You're not good enough," and instead of obeying it, you ask, "Says who?" When you feel the urge to shrink in the face of a challenge, and instead of retreating, you wonder, "What if this fear isn't mine?" That's the moment the dream begins to crack. And through those cracks, the light of your deeper self starts to shine. The deeper self isn't afraid. It isn't limited. It doesn't need to prove anything or perform for anyone. It simply is. It watches. It knows. It's the witness behind your thoughts, the awareness behind your emotions, the silence behind your words. Every spiritual tradition points to this truth. The Hindus call it the Atman. The Buddhists call it pure awareness, and the mystics call it the soul. But you don't need a label for it. You just need to experience it. And once you do, even for a moment, everything changes. So I'll ask you now, who are you when you stop performing? When no one's watching, and there's nothing to prove? What remains when all your roles and stories fall away? Are you willing to let go of who you think you are to discover who you've always been? The final veil, why facing the unknown is the only way to truly live there, comes a point on every inner journey when words no longer help. When logic, strategy, and even self-reflection start to feel like another layer of distraction. That's when you've reached the final veil, the one that separates what you know from what you are. And what's behind that veil isn't more information, more insight, or even more clarity. It's the unknown, the ungraspable. It's the raw, unfiltered experience of being without identity, without certainty, without the safety of a narrative to hold on to. And to cross that threshold, you have to do the one thing we've been taught to avoid at all costs: surrender. Most of us live our lives avoiding the unknown. We plan every step, try to predict every outcome, and cling to familiarity even when it's painful because at least it's known. The unknown feels like death to the ego. And in a way it is. Because to step into the unknown is to let go of control, to abandon the illusion that you can figure it all out. It's to stand naked before existence with no map, no promise, and no guarantee. And yet, paradoxically, that's exactly where real life begins. That's where freedom lives, not in certainty, but in presence. Not in answers, but in openness. When you face the unknown directly, something incredible happens. You stop needing to define yourself. You stop needing to know where it's all going. You stop needing life to make sense. And in that space of radical unknowing, a deeper intelligence takes over. You begin to feel your way through life instead of thinking your way through it. You start to trust your intuition, your body, your subtle sense of timing. You begin to move with life instead of against it. You realize that life itself is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. This is the final truth that every spiritual path, every philosophical system, every awakened human points to in their own way, that the deepest reality is not something you can control or understand, it's something you surrender to. And in that surrender, you don't lose yourself. You find the part of you that was never lost. The stillness beneath the noise, the awareness beneath the thoughts, the timeless presence that has always been watching, waiting, loving. So the final question is not who am I, but am I willing to let go of who I think I am? Am I willing to release the stories, the roles, the fears, the masks? Am I willing to face the unknown, not as a threat, but as a doorway? Because if you can stand in that sacred not knowing long enough, you'll discover something astonishing. The life you've been searching for has been here all along. Not in the plans, not in the striving, but in this moment, this breath, this awareness. Your life is not what it seems. It never was. Because you are not the dream. You are the dreamer. And the moment you remember that, the dream changes. Not because you forced it to, but because you finally woke up.